Ja, velkommen til oss, kjære seere. Velkommen til Frikanalen, til Trond Alis kvarter. I dag har vi med oss en interessant gjest vi skal snakke med. Han sitter selv i England. Det er Gilad Atzmon. I think I have to introduce him in English language. Gilad Atzmon, welcome to our program. We are happy to have you with us, and we look forward for sure to an interesting talk, we hope. Gilad Atzmon, he was born in Palestine, Israel. He grew up as a devoted Israeli, patriotic Israeli. He went into the Israeli army and started to reconsider his position. He saw this Israeli army, its practice, its ideology, and he started to develop a new way of thinking, bringing him from this Israeli position towards humanism. And today he is a strong supporter and worker for justice, supporting the Palestinian cause. I hope I have understood this correct. Gilad, you have to correct me if something is wrong in it. At least, welcome to us. We are happy to have you with us, and we look forward to this talk with you. So again, welcome, Gilad Atzmon.
You were pretty right. I was born in 63 to a pretty nationalist Israeli family, and I wouldn't call it Zionist because for us Israelis, Zionism is something that really died or ended or accomplished itself in 1948, because Zionism initially promised to erect a Jewish state, and this state was formed in 1948. So at that point in time, for the Israelis, I'm not talking about the diaspora Jews, Zionism has fulfilled itself, and a new discourse starts, and it is the discourse of Israeliness. So I was born in Israel, and as a youngster I was very committed to this idea of Israel. Now, what was the idea of Israel or Israeliness? It was to break away from the Jewish ethos and to start a new path, a new harmonious path. And the early Zionists, Herzl, Naudo, Berl, Katzenelson, Adi Gordon, quite a big list, and actually I find them very interesting. Their promise was to make the Jews, the diaspora Jews, people like all other people. So in a way to normalize the morbidity in the Jewish condition. This was the philosophy beyond Israel. Now Israel calls itself the Jewish state, but for me, in the very early stages of my life, or my parents who were born in Palestine, Israel wasn't a Jewish state. It was the complete opposite. It was an attempt to defy Jewishness and to become something else. Nationalist, to be bonded to the land. This is why we see labor Zionism. This is why we see the rise of kibbutzim, all those collective settlements on the land. Kibbutz is the antithesis of the diaspora Jew in the eyes of the Zionist. The kibbutz is there to settle on the land and to live socialist life. It is in the Zionist mind, the early Zionist mind, is the antithesis of the perception of the diaspora Jew as a capitalist, as a banker who is removed from the land. And we were very excited about this idea. The one thing that we didn't really realize, that the land belonged to someone else, i.e. the Palestinians. We had some rumors about it. I was born in 63, so I wasn't a witness for what happened in 48. Even when I talked to my father, who was maybe 9 years old in 48, he was a bit wishy-washy about it, and so were others in his generation. And my father was born in Palestine to a family that lived already for quite a while in the region. So he was basically proper Palestinian. And even he, as a kid, could, at the time, could speak about it. He understands it more now, I think. Anyway, we were very patriotic. I was very committed to the Zionist, or to the Israeli patriotic narrative, I should say. And then, at the time of the Lebanon War, 82, first Lebanon War, I was a soldier. I joined the Israeli army in 81. And what I saw there struck my confidence in the Israeli patriotic ethos, or if you want to say Zionism. I realized that we were invaders, we were expansionists, we were engaged in some serious war crimes, and my pride of the Jewish morphosis evaporated very quickly. The Lebanon War wasn't an instant adventure. It's actually started in 82 and continued for many years. And along my 2 years as an Israeli soldier, the 2 years that were left from 82 to 84, I saw some brutal scenes. I've been in Ansar. It was practically a concentration camp. It should have been a POW camp, but Israel refused to accept giving the rights of a POW to Palestinians. I was pretty devastated. I can talk about Ansar. I spoke about it in a few occasions, but I saw, for instance, the solitary confinement. The solitary confinement in Ansar, where basically, this is something that I saw in summer 84, just before I left the army, where basically concrete cubes, kind of something like 1 meter high, 1 meter 20 long, maybe 90 centimeters width, with a metal door. There were 12 of them, I think 12, maybe 10, maybe 13, I don't remember exactly, in a circle. And I told the commander-in-chief at the time, listen, make sure that you don't put dogs in these places. Don't worry, these are not for dogs, these are for Palestinians. And I spoke about it many times in my talks, and nobody knew what I was talking about. And when I visited Lebanon for the first time, I think in 2013, I mean, not for the first time, for the first time, and not as an Israeli soldier. And one of the first things that they did was to take me to see these kind of constructions. I took pictures of them. So the Lebanese knew very well what was this kind of measures of abuse and solitary confinement were in used by the IDF. I never been a very political person. I'm still not really about politics. I explain the political move from a philosophical perspectives. But anyway, in '87 I was very unhappy after what I saw in the Lebanon War, and realized that it was just a question of time before I drift away from Israel. But in '87, the first Intifada, I realized for the first time that for me to live in Palestine was actually to participate in a crime. I was living on someone else's land. It wasn't entirely my fault. I was born there. But I realized that it will be very difficult to resolve.
Who was the owner of this land? What is the history of this land?
You're right. It's how stupid of me not to mention. I was living obviously on Palestinian land. Of course. I thought, I take it for granted that people understand.
Yes, I'm sure they understand.
I'm sorry. You're absolutely right. But still, I was a young student, a musician in the beginning of my career. I did very well in Israel. And at the time, I had the wrong feeling, but I had good enough reasons to be mistaken, that still at least half of the Israeli people were supporting peace and reconciliation and to bring this conflict to an end. Few years later, '92, we became aware of the Oslo Accord. And for me, the Oslo Accord was the end of the road. And you may say, how is it possible? Oslo Accord was kind of a peace agreement. By '92, I realized that the Palestinian cause was all about the right of return. And it seemed very reasonable to me, because if my family, my father family, they lived in Palestine, and they were not exactly idealists. They were there. They were not Zionists. But my other side, my father, my grandfather, my mother's father was ultra right-wing Zionist idealist, and he came to Palestine because he believed that he has the right to return to his land. To return to what land? To return to a land that allegedly was promised to him by a God 2,000 years ago. It took me many years to understand that it's quite convenient to be a Jew, because you invent a God that loves you more than anyone else and give you other people land. Now, if I come to a mental therapist and tell, listen, man, I had this kind of an idea of a God that really loves me, and he give me your clinic, he will call emergency services, and I will be detained in a psychiatric hospital. But when it comes to this identity, this collective identity, this is what they really believe. They invented a God that gave them a land, that make them chosen, that punish them with all this kind of impunity and so on and so on. And I started to realize that there is something uniquely wrong about this perception. But because I wasn't a political person, and again I want to go back to Oslo, I realized that Oslo wasn't really an attempt at harmony and reconciliation, which is what peace means for me. Holocaust was about shalom. Shalom is not peace. Shalom in Hebrew, in modern Hebrew, means security for the Jews. It's not harmony and reconciliation. It's not something that we saw that happened between Germany and France, or Germany and Britain, or Germany and Norway after World War II. All right, we had a war, we did some horrible thing. Okay, it's a new path. The Oslo Agreement was about keeping the Palestinian in Gaza, in the West Bank, in the diaspora, and Israel living in secure borders. And my first instinct was, I get out of here. I realized that if it leads anywhere, I don't want to be in the place where it leads to, because it's to establish a form of severe unjust. And if it collapses, as it collapses at the moment, as we speak, I definitely don't want to be there. I told my wife, my young wife at the time, she's still with me, shockingly enough. I told, listen, you can decide whether you want to stay or to join me, but I am not going to start a family in this place on someone else's land. I'm out. Now, it is very interesting, and I never spoke about it. At the time of the first Intifada, we were buying our first house, and I never spoke about it. But you know that the current escalation started, actually not in Jerusalem, it started in Jaffa, near Tel Aviv. There were some fights between Palestinians, Israeli Arabs they call them, in Jaffa, and rabbinical community, Orthodox community of settlers that moved to live in Jaffa, and so on and so on. And it brought to my mind, I kind of remembered that before I left Israel, when we bought our first house in Israel, we bought kind of a very, very small one-bedroom house. It was quite cute. Some friends told me, Gilad, why do you spend money on a house? You are an artist with kind of a growing name. We can sort you out. And soon after, I was called by an Israeli company and told him, listen, with your credential as an artist, we can give you a house in Jaffa. It's basically kind of a lease, so you pay something very little, something like maybe $1,000, and you get it for 99 years. And I asked him, tell me more, and he said, yeah, these are houses of Palestinians that were 1948, ethnically cleansed 1948. Now, this is exactly where the clashes started, because the company that approached me, Amidar, was the same company that was about to lease those houses to these settlers. Anyway, it became very clear to me that I didn't want to be part of this ethnic cleansing project, and I really didn't think about it too deeply. I left Israel in 93 or 94. I settled in Britain. I was doing my master's degree in philosophy and started my PhD. And then, and I already had a beautiful career as a musician. I'm a jazz artist. And then was the second Intifada. And the second Intifada was shocking for me, because suddenly I saw Israeli brutality on the BBC, on CNN, on what else was there? I don't remember actually. I try to think what else we could watch in 2001. Fox, I don't know, Sky definitely. And I felt sickened by it, and I felt that I didn't want any connection with this brutality. I don't want to be associated with it. I don't want to explain where it comes from. I want to move as far away as I can. And I started to write about it, and I wrote about it. I never saw myself as a writer. And I wrote something to a few friends, and 3 days later it was on Counterpunch. If you remember, there used to be Counterpunch used to be kind of a very brave magazine of dissent. Now it's actually turned into Kosher Punch. It's not very serious. It's actually slightly pathetic. But I became kind of a leading writer for Counterpunch, and I, without me, I was studying philosophy at the time, and I started to dig actually deeper and deeper into these questions to do with Jewishness. Why it's not Zionism, because Zionism for Israelis died in 1948, and it's not necessarily Israeliness, because Israeliness could be brutal, but it was seeking this metamorphosis. And I realized that Israel started to call itself the Jewish state, and I realized that if a country calls itself the Jewish state, the first thing that you have to ask is, who are the Jews? What is Jewishness? What is Judaism? And how all those terms are linked to each other, and what is their impact on a state that called itself the Jewish state. When I started to ask these questions, I saw a lot of resistance. And the first people who tried to silence me were not the Zionists, so to say. They were the Jewish left, actually. And I remember that I had a meeting with the leader of JPP in New York, maybe in 2010 or 11, or Rebecca Wilcomerson, and we spoke. She was nice, and we spoke for quite a while, and we agreed on most things. And then she told me, listen, we really want you to... We're really happy with what you're saying, but we really want to make sure that you stop talking about the J word, Judaism, Jewishness, and you concentrate on the Z word, Zionism. And I told her, how can I? And no one in Israel, and she knows it very well because her husband is an Israeli, and I knew his mother very well. She was the great Israeli theatrical talent. She knew very well that Israelis don't see themselves as Zionists. They don't even, if you call an Israeli Zionist, they laugh at you. It's kind of an...
But may I add to these points? It comes to my mind that the President of United States recently announced that he is a Zionist. What does he mean by such an expression, you think?
Exactly. Now, there are some issues like Christian Zionism. Christian Zionism is actually a very deep concept that goes actually well beyond Israel, and obviously in America at least, it's and actually in Britain as well, and the Balfour Declaration and so on and so on. It's a very interesting concept, but for Israeli Jews, Zionism was a very specific term, and this term meant a revolution, and this revolution ended in 48, and from that point we were living in the post-revolution era. For diaspora Jews, for Norwegian Jews, I don't think that you have many of them, or English, British Jew, an American Jew, to be a Zionist is to dream of going through this revolutionary process. But once they settle in their, in this West Bank settlement, Zionism has been accomplished. They are now becoming Israelis. Anyway, at the time I realized that there is a big duplicitous impetus at the core of the Jewish anti-Zionist discourse. I started to notice that they try to dominate the language and the politics, and by doing so they actually managed to interfere and dismantle the real meaning of the Palestinian cause. Suddenly, instead of talking about the right of return, we started to talk about end of occupation. I said, sorry, end of occupation. Yeah, occupation is not good, but for the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, occupation is not a problem. For the Palestinian in Gaza, occupation, maybe from 2005, is not the problem. For the diaspora, Palestinian occupation is not the problem. Actually, I start to understand end of occupation actually legitimizes Israel within the 67 borders. I realized that the Jewish anti-Zionists started to talk about, for instance, apartheid or colonialism. I said, sorry, wait, hang on a minute. Colonialism is a very precise historical notion. It refers to a relationship between a settler state and a mother state. Israel is a settler state, but who is the mother state? Was it England? But England disappeared. So is it now America? So do they start to move between, they swap mothers every few years? What is going on? I realized that it's not colonialism. When I pointed out that it's not colonialism, they invented another notion, or they introduced another faulty notion, settler colonialism. Settler colonialism is something completely different. Settler colonialism is when a mother state A deploys ethnic minority B to land C on the expense of the indigenous people of the land. So for instance, Britain sending Scots to Ireland, and by doing so actually abusing the rights of the Irish people. But in the case of Zionism, it was Jewish lobby B persuading the Brits A to give them Palestine on the expense of the Palestinians. So if settler colonialism is historical order of A, B, C, D, in the case of Zionism, it's B, A, C, D. It's a different pattern. And the reason is that Zionism is a very unique movement. Not many times in history, people stood up and said, listen, we've been here 2,000 years ago, please go away, we want to come back. This never happened in history. This is a unique movement, and when you understand that it's a unique movement, you try to understand what is at the core of this impunity. And this is what I try to do. I face a lot of resistance. They call me names, they call me Holocaust denier, Nazi, anti-Semite, which is quite strange, because now you have all over the world, of every country that I play in and perform in and give talks in and publish my books in, they all have laws against racism and anti-Semitism and Nazism. And obviously I've never been charged, I've never been questioned once about anything I've said or written. I'm actually very, very careful, and this is something that I understood in the very beginning. We are dealing with identity that is racially driven, so to say. Zionism is a racist movement.
If you can explain on this matter, Gilad, how is Zionism a racist movement?
I don't argue that Jews are a race. I actually can prove that they are not. But the political identification as a Jew is driven by racial orientation, because they believe themselves to be a tribe that is connected by blood, specifically by the blood of through the blood of the mother. In order to prove that you are a Jew, you have to show that you have a Jewish mother. Why is it that you have to prove that you have a Jewish mother? Because we never know who is the father. But with the mother, it's quite easy to establish. So it's strictly a form of blood-oriented identity. So when you criticize this racially oriented philosophy, and especially the politics that is implied by this identity, what they do, they actually accuse you of being a racist. No! What we are doing is anti-racist. We actually speak about Palestine being the lands of its citizens, of the people who live there, and the people who live there for many, many years, as opposed to the land of the Jews, wherever they are. Anyway, the more I was attacked by Jewish left, and it's quite clear that the Zionists were also very unhappy with my work. But the fact that Alan Dershowitz is upset by me is hardly a surprise for me. But the fact that the people who were most enthusiastic about silencing me were actually the Jewish anti-Zionists taught me a lot about this identity, about the role, about what is Jewish power. It was the Jewish anti-Zionist resistance to me that made me understand the Jewish power is the power to suppress discussion on Jewish power. This was a major finding. By the way, by now it is not very unique to Jewish power. In fact, this is the meaning of political correctness. Political correctness is politics that doesn't allow political opposition. It is exactly like Jewish power. And this is why we see a very interesting continuum between Jewish identitarianism and left progressivism. And if you want to continue to talk about this identitarianism and this ideological, spiritual, cultural continuum, so we see Jewish identitarianism, identitarianism in general. There are a lot of people now that are defined biologically, that are defined politically by their biology. Jews, Zionists, for instance, say, we are Zionists because we are Jews. So it's a racially oriented political view. But Jewish anti-Zionists are doing exactly the same mistake. They say we are anti-Zionists, but they're still working in a racially oriented group, which is absurd. And then you look at other identitarian groups such as transsexual, lesbians, black. We have more and more groups that are actually operating in biologically oriented political identification.
Mr. Gilad, you mentioned that you had no intention to become a writer, but you have written several books, interesting and important books. Especially, I have a focus on this one, The Wandering Who. I think that is really an interesting and important book. And those following us on this program, I advise you to buy it and to read it.
I understand that a lot of people like my writing, and as I developed, I learned to enjoy writing, and I think that people recognize now that I'm a good writer. That's what I'm doing in my, my adult life. I'm playing music and I'm writing my intellectual musing on the metaphysics of Jewishness. Anyway, I think that without understanding that which drives the state that calls itself the Jewish state, we cannot really understand the Palestinian situation. We cannot really admit to the fact that what we see de facto in Israel, Palestine now has morphed into an ethnic conflict. It's not a political conflict. Political conflicts can be resolved. Ethnic conflicts are never resolved. And when it comes to religious conflicts, the situation is pretty hopeless. And this is really the situation here. It is not a coincidence that the clashes that we see now broke out because ultra Zionists, right-wing Israelis, I say ultra Zionists, but I should say right-wing Judaic fronts, like Knesset member Gvir and so on and so on. And by the way, what I'm saying here is validated by the Israeli chief policeman, who said that it was this Israeli right-wing politician who pushed the region into such an escalation. It was their claim for the land, for instance, of Jerusalem, Sheikh Jarrah, the clashes that they pushed for in Jaffa, near Tel Aviv, and also in the old city of Jerusalem, that led to the spark of this violence. The most amazing news here is that, like in every disastrous chapter in Jewish history, the Jews are actually becoming more and more divided on a lot of idiotic issues. They are not divided about left and right. They are divided on issues whether they like Netanyahu, don't like Netanyahu, and so on and so on. They all want they all have a similar vision of what the Jewish state should be. And this is, by the way, another reason why I don't like to call Israel apartheid. Apartheid is a racist system of exploitation. Israelis don't want to exploit Palestinians, Israel at large. The vast majority of Israeli politicians, they want the Palestinian gone. Israel is an ethnic cleanser. Ethnic cleansing is way worse than apartheid. It's an invasive cleansing entity. It's a robbery, it's a plunder. It's a completely different story. Anyway, we cannot understand this conflict unless we understand that it morphed into a religious conflict. Now, I don't say that all the Israelis are religious, and I don't say that all the Palestinians, but the movement that are most significant in the region and the shaping the conflict are religious sentiments.
It seems not very easy indeed to find a way out of this present situation with the bombing, the killing, Jerusalem, Gaza. May I ask, do you have any suggestion how to get out of this situation, take steps towards some kind of a peace, Gilad?
It's a very interesting question. One of the reasons that we see this crisis is because in the last 6 weeks, the leader of the Israeli Muslim party, Mansour Abbas, the leader of Raham, became the Israeli kingmaker. He stood up a month ago in front of the Jewish nation, prime time, 8 o'clock in the evening, delivered a wonderful speech in Hebrew, and he said, "We are human beings. There is more that we share than that which divides us. I am happy to participate now in the Israeli political game, to be in a government, and Netanyahu couldn't form a government without him. He moved forward, and Netanyahu needs the government not because he likes Arabs or Muslims, but because he tries to cling to power because he faces some serious legal issues. When we look at this conflict, the only people who hold the key to a solution in the region are the Palestinians, and maybe even the Islamic party. And why? Because Islam is fundamentally a reconciliatory, a peace-seeking precept. It tries to put people together. It's universal. Judaism is tribal, which is not a problem. I don't have issues with tribalism, and by the way, as we know, some of the most pious Jews in Israel actually support Palestine. Judaism is tribal. the ideology. I'm moving beyond the cult, beyond the religion. I'm moving into the ideology, the cultural ethos that keeps Jews together, in the left, in the right, is racially oriented. Again, Jews are not race, but Jewishness is racially oriented. B, it is extremely tribal. And it is defined by antagonism. I can give you a lecture why Jewishness evolved into such an antagonistic precept, but the most important issue that we have to understand now is that people who hold antagonistic tribal views are fearful of assimilation. Zionism came to life when Jews were assimilating in Europe. They were terrified. The Zionists were terrified. They said, if we assimilate, we are going to disappear. Oy vey! Judaism was created, as we know, it was created in Babylon, where Jews were assimilated. And I'll tell you, you don't have to go very far. I can come with an example that a lot of people will understand. For instance, feminism. In the late 19th century, early 20th century, some women started to say, listen, we are citizens of Britain, of America, of Sweden, of Norway, of Germany, and we don't enjoy all the rights. We want to be equal. And some people are getting upset by it, and they start to fight for it, and many of us agree that women should be equal, and then finally they achieve equality. By the time you achieve equality, you are pretty institutionalized and you have enough political power. You have a lot of followers. What are you going to do with it? This is the moment that you should quit. You said, I've achieved what I wanted. But in most cases, we see an evolvement of beginning of separatist shift. You don't want just to be equal. You want to see yourself as better. You want to see yourself as differentiated, distinguished. Yeah? You start to say that the society that accepted you should be abolished. And this is something that we see in the later phase, for instance, of the feminist movement. This is something that happens to every identitarian discourse, to gays. It will happen to LGBT. It happened to every identitarian discourse. The only difference between, let's say, Jewish identitarianism and feminism is the Jews have been doing it for 2,500 years. And feminists are doing it for 100 years. And trans are doing it for 10, LGBT are doing it for 10 years or 15 years. So obviously if you're doing something for 2,500 years, you develop some tactics. You become good at it. If you give me 2,500 years to practice my saxophone, I'll be a monster. I'll be as good as Coltrane. I hope. If not, it will be really embarrassing.
Mr. Gilad, is this to say that maybe one way towards peace, at least theoretical, would be that pure and sincere Islam and pure and sincere Judaism get together and establish some kind of a cooperation to promote some kind of understanding, and this might be a way to try to find solution to the present problem we are facing?
it is fun. It is fun. You know, I'm not a I'm not a Muslim, and I'm definitely not a Jew. But the most amazing thing that happens, thanks following this development with Mansour Abbas, was that the Jewish Orthodox parties said, we definitely prefer to sit with a pious Muslim than with the Meretz LGBTQ. They don't like them. The Orthodox Jews, they don't agree with the gender sex orientation parties. So if we start to think of the people who live between the river and the sea, it is very possible that most of them actually are religious. So there is more chance of a bond between the Muslims. And within the context of such development, it is clear to me that quite a few Israelis will feel uncomfortable, probably most of my friends. And by the way, they feel very uncomfortable already for many years. They are very jealous of me making the move so many years ago. And it is also possible that a lot of Palestinians will feel very uncomfortable. Many Palestinians actually would like to live the life of free Israelis. This is something that we must acknowledge. In fact, Israelis are shocked by the fact, by the scale of the uprising in the Palestinian, in the Israeli Arab community. They're shocked by it.
Mr. Gilad, we started this discussion focus on the present war, trying to propose some kind of way towards peace. Do you have further comments on this situation? What might be your conclusion in this respect, Gilad?
The situation is amazing on every possible level, because there is no military match between Israel and the IDF and the Israeli Air Force or the Israeli Navy and the Hamas. For the same reason that there was no real match between the Hezbollah forces in 2006 and the Israeli military at the time, and yet the Hezbollah won in 2006. Israel was defeated. It went out of Lebanon with the tails between its legs, and never tried to attack Lebanon to reach a confrontation with Hezbollah. And by the way, Hezbollah also didn't want to engage in a full-scale confrontation with Israel, because they ended up the winners in 2006, and they want to keep it like that. Israel has a big air force, the most advanced American airplanes, the most advanced bombs, the most advanced drones, and still the Hamas is winning the battle. And this is an astonishing development. And by the way, you know, it's not the first time. When you look at Vietnam, American army had 10 times more firepower than the Viet Cong, and the Viet Cong won, because you win when you have nothing to lose. You win because you are willing to sacrifice. You win when you are determined. And these are the qualities that we see from the Palestinians. For many years, I myself wrote quite a lot about it. I wrote about the fact that the Palestinians cannot agree what is their cause, what is the number one priority, because they are divided. We have Palestinian in Gaza, we have Palestinian in Lebanon, we have Palestinian in the West Bank, we have Palestinian in Israel. Each of these groups, each of these segments want something else. The Palestinians in Gaza want one day without a drone spying on them. In the West Bank, they want to drive from A to B without meeting an Israeli soldier in the roadblock. In the Israeli Arabs, the Palestinian living in Israel, they want just to be equal. In Lebanon, they want someone to acknowledge the right of return. Israel controlled these Palestinians separated very easily by legislation and just a few soldiers. In order to upset the one in the West Bank, they got a few soldiers on roadblocks. In Gaza, there's a few Israelis on joysticks flying drones. In Lebanon, they forget about the right of return. Within Israel, they kept, abusing them, oppressing them with lack of funding for education, so on and so on. And Israel got itself to the point that it started to believe that the Palestinian cause has evaporated. They thought that Palestinian cause is just a few Palestinian solidarity making some noise in Washington or Chicago or London. And suddenly it is there. It's inside their cities. It's in Tel Aviv, it's in Jerusalem, it is Nazareth, it's Acre, it's everywhere. It's 20% of the population, and they are extremely unhappy. Now, you look at military objectives. When there is a war, you ask your general, what is my military objective? You are a soldier. You are a commander. You are a colonel. You are ordered to fulfill a task, and you ask, what is the military objective? There is no military objective for the Israeli army to push for. They are not allowed to cause too much of a damage to Gaza, collateral damage, because they understand that if Hezbollah joins with the backing of Iran, what they saw from Gaza, which we are talking about 8,000 missiles, the Hamas, we believe, will be nothing in comparison to the 150,000 missiles we believe the Hezbollah is, and they are cutting edge technology. Yeah, they are very precise, and it will prove that the Israeli Iron Dome is completely useless. Already now people start to ask questions. So Israel is fighting a war without objectives. The military is dying to reach ceasefire, because they say from every minute now we are going downhill. We can only make mistakes. It's enough that airplane is throwing bomb, and it already happened a few times this week, on the wrong house, and we kill many civilians. It will look horrible all over the world. America is already pushing. When it comes to the Hamas, they already, in the first 24 hours of this current conflict, they achieved all their targets. They united the Palestinian people. They showed that the Palestine is something that goes beyond Jerusalem, beyond Gaza, beyond Acre. It's the entire land between the river and the sea. They show that they managed to surprise the Israeli militarily. I was a kid in 73. It was an incredible, in the first days, incredible Arab victory. The Arab leaders then, Assad, the father, Hafez al-Assad, and in Syria, and Sadat in Egypt, they didn't dare to send their airplanes or to try to target Tel Aviv. Ania did it. The Hamas, without ground-to-air missiles, knowing that they will suffer, and they keep targeting Israeli cities. And by the way, I'm very happy that they don't kill many Israelis, because for me, and I'm saying it for 20 years, the missiles are there not to kill. They are a message. They are there to tell the Israelis, listen, you are living on our land. In Jaffa, in Haifa, in Acre, in Beersheba, in all those lands, you are on their lands. You better get it into your mind, because we are not going to give up. It's not happening. And the Israelis still at the leadership level refuse to acknowledge it, and only think in military terms. What they have to do in order to get the Arabs on their knees. I read it every 2 minutes on the Israeli press. It is very, 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 very sad, because on the one hand, Jews always mention to us that their history is a chain of disasters. In that respect, Israel was an opportunity to open a new page in Jewish history, and look where we are. It is heading toward a new disaster, new Jewish disaster. And the next question is why people can't change their fate. And I believe now that there is no way to change the fate of the Jews as a collective. But if you are a Jew and you see what I'm saying, you see the logos, you see the rationality, you see that something is extremely wrong, don't try to save the tribe. Try to save yourself. Try to start to ask questions. Try to find your own way towards peace, towards reconciliation. And for me, this is the biggest message of Jesus Christ. Turn the other cheek. When somebody attacks you, you can retaliate, you can fight till the end of days, and you can say, okay, you want to do it again? Come. And this is how I try to deal with my enemies. And they never stop. But at least I know that my spirit is clean. I learn to enjoy it. And this is my biggest recommendation to Israelis. Look in the mirror, find your way as a person.
Gilad Atzmon, we thank you very much for being with us. I think your point of view, your way of thinking, your proposals, your lessons are very interesting and important indeed. So we thank you for being with us today.
And send my love to all our friends in Norway.
And for sure we will invite you for further talks and discussions in the future. and we hope you will have time for it. But for now, thank you very much indeed for this talk. Thank you, Gilad Atzmon.